Before we dive into the video, I've got two exciting updates for you all. Firstly, if you haven't already, please head over to my Patreon and at least join as a free member. I've posted new data and statistical analysis as a free preview for the main event of UFC 302, Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. Now for the first update, I've introduced a new tier to my Patreon, which is priced at $20 a month. This tier includes in-depth stats and analysis on fighters, their records, and historical performances. In the future, I'll be adding even more analysis and resources to this tier. So I've provided you all with the stats and analysis for the main event of UFC 302 for free. So please check it out. Let me know your thoughts and what else you'd like to see, and I'll go ahead and work on it for you all. For the $20 a month tier, you're going to get detailed performance stats of each fighter in every historical fight, including offensive and defensive stats, quantities, and percentages. I've also included a stat summary comparison between each fighter and their historical opponent's stat averages. This will give you insight into the advantages or disadvantages of their upcoming opponent. So for example, you'll see a fighter's stats like Dustin Poirier's, and then you'll see the combined stats of his historical opponents. Now I've also visualized key percentages across each individual fight so you can see how consistent a fighter has been in their striking and grappling over the course of their career. These stats help reduce anomalies and identify strengths and weaknesses, which will aid in your picks and bets. But that's not all. I've also included a full record breakdown for each fighter. This breakdown includes their total career record, their wins, their losses, their performances by round, finishes by round, their most recent wins, their most recent losses, their current streak, how they've performed in their last 5 fights, notable opponents that they've won and lost to, their performance by year, and insight into their record by popular promotions. All of this is available for each fighter for full cards for $20 a month. And since there's 3 to 4 events per month, that's only $5 per event. If you're not interested in doing the membership and only want the analysis for the card, you can purchase it as a standalone analysis in my Patreon store. I'll also continue to add to this tier over time. You guys know that I don't take any days off. I always take advantage of weeks where there's no UFC event, and I use those weeks and weekends to improve and add to my content on top of my 9 to 5, which is really an 8 to 7. But I love doing this stuff and running it for you all. The second major update that I have is that I'm now an affiliate for BetUS, thanks to all of you guys. If you want to open an account with them and receive promotional benefits like a 125% bonus on your first 3 deposits, plus a 10% gambler's insurance for UFC 302, please use the link in the description. It's thanks to you all that I can be an affiliate for BetUS, so thank you for your continued support. I genuinely appreciate this community that we've built and are continuing to build together. Interacting with you all is always the highlight of my week. I hope you all are having a great weekend and are as excited for this upcoming event as I am. So with those updates out of the way, let's go ahead and proceed with our regular prediction video. UFC 302 Makhachev versus Poirier is this Saturday, and for each fight, including the prelims, I'm going to compare stats, review recent fight history, analyze the results of each of my 7 data science prediction models, give a combined weighted prediction of those models, and then give a final prediction which considers both quantitative and qualitative information combined. Later this week, I'll also upload a video covering promising underdogs and inexpensive favorites, and now including prop bets to highlight opportunities for you all. Hopefully you can use these predictions and data to confirm your picks, avoid mistakes, and find some value bets, or for just entertainment and informative purposes in order to prepare for this upcoming event. Please like and subscribe if you find this interesting, informative, or helpful, as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you would like to support me through that. There's a $10 contribution/donation tier and a $20 premium tier, which includes extra data analysis and stats. Running this data and analysis, each of the prediction models, the fight simulations, the charts and graphs, and updating the website takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate any support that you guys can show at all. And thank you all for the recent support that you have shown. I really can't believe that I'm at 790 subscribers. That's insane to me. It really means the world to me that we can all share our passion together for MMA and continue to build this community together. So let's go ahead and jump right into the predictions. For the first fight, we have Mitch Raposo versus Lima. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Mitch Raposo is 5 feet 5 inches tall with a reach of 64 inches and is 25 years old. And on the other hand, Andre Lima is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 67 inches and is 25 years old as well. Now, before we get into the fighting stats, I do want to let you guys know that Mitch Raposo's stats come from only one fight. When it comes to striking, Mitch Raposo lands 2.57 strikes per minute at a 25% accuracy. Andre Lima, on the other hand, lands 3.98 strikes per minute at a 60% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Mitch Raposo lands 3.67 takedowns on average with a 66% accuracy, while Andre Lima, on the other hand, lands 1.31 takedowns on average with a 66% accuracy as well. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Mitch absorbs 3.18 strikes per minute with a 56% striking defense without any takedown defense recorded, whereas Andre Lima absorbs 2.67 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and a 61% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Mitch Raposo's recent fight history. Recently, Mitch Raposo is coming off of a loss against Jake Hadley via submission back in October 12, 2021. His total record is 9 wins and only 1 loss, and out of his 9 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 of them were submissions, and 2 of them were decision victories, which is a 78% finishing rate. His only loss was a submission loss. He also has 4 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's on a 4-fight win streak. His most recent win was in January 2024, and his most recent loss was in October of 2021. Now let's check out Andre Lima's recent fight history. Recently, Andre's coming off of a win against Igor Severina via disqualification back in March of 2024. His total record is 7 wins and no losses, and out of his 7 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs and 2 were decision victories, which gives him a 63% finishing rate. He also has 4 first-round finishes, and recently he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights. Now, unfortunately, this is the only fight on the entire card that I could not run through my prediction models, and that's because of the debut. However, the odd probabilities are giving Andre Lima a 64.3% probability of victory. And I generally agree with that because Andre Lima has a height advantage of 2 inches, he has a reach advantage of 3 inches, he lands 1.41 more strikes per minute, he has a 35% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 0.51 less strikes per minute, and he has a 4% higher striking defense as well. Andre Lima is undefeated. He's won 8 fights and he's finished 63% of them. He's even won his 1 UFC fight and his Dana White Contender Series fight. But let's go ahead and discuss some reasons aside from stats alone as to why Lima is likely to win. Lima's strengths lie in his striking skills. He has a background in kickboxing and a record of powerful finishes. He also benefits from a reach advantage, which will allow him to control the distance and pace of this fight. Lima's mental toughness and his composure under pressure, combined with his undefeated record and his recent momentum, make him a confident and challenging opponent. However, Lima's ground game is a potential weakness, and Raposo's experience in high-level competition could pose a challenge here. Lima's key opportunities lie in exploiting Raposo's defensive flaws and maintaining distance to utilize his striking. Overall, Lima's strategic advantages in striking, reach, mental toughness, and his momentum could be deciding factors in this matchup. My final prediction is that Andre Lima will win, but it's going to go to the judges and he's going to win via unanimous decision. For the next fight, we have Eileen Perez versus Jocelyn Edwards. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Eileen Perez is 5 feet 5 inches tall with a reach of 66 inches and is 29 years old. And on the other hand, Jocelyn Edwards is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 28 years old. When it comes to striking, Eileen Perez lands 2.96 strikes per minute with a 55% accuracy. Jocelyn Edwards, on the other hand, lands 4.71 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Eileen Perez lands 4.89 takedowns on average at a 50% accuracy, while Jocelyn Edwards, on the other hand, lands 1 takedown on average at a 33% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Eileen Perez absorbs 1.18 strikes per minute with a 57% striking defense and a 75% takedown defense, whereas Jocelyn Edwards absorbs 3.36 strikes per minute with a 50% striking defense and a 64% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Eileen Perez's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a win against Lucy Podolova via unanimous decision, which was back in November of 2023. Her total record is 9 wins and 1 loss, and out of her 9 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission, and 4 were decision victories, which gives her a 56% finishing rate. Her only loss was a submission loss, and she also has 3 first-round finishes. She's recently won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she is on a 2-fight win streak. Her most recent win was back in November of 2023, and her most recent loss was back in September of 2022. Now let's take a look at Jocelyn Edwards' recent fight history. Recently, Jocelyn Edwards is coming off of a loss against Nora Cornol via unanimous decision back in September of 2023. Her total record is 13 wins and 5 losses, and out of her 13 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 were submissions, and 5 were decision victories, which gives her a 62% finishing rate. Her 5 losses were split, with 1 being via submission and 4 of them being decision losses. She has 6 first-round finishes, and recently she's won 3 out of her last 5 fights, but she is coming off of a loss into this fight. Her most recent win was back in April of 2023, and her most recent loss was in September of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. 6 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Eileen Perez, and only 1 is leaning towards Jocelyn Edwards. And when we weigh those prediction models together, we get a 59.2% probability of victory for Eileen Perez. Now for my final prediction, I give Eileen Perez a more confident 64% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Eileen Perez has a 3% higher striking accuracy. She absorbs 2.18 less strikes per minute. She has a 7% higher striking defense. She lands 3.89 more takedowns on average. She has a 17% higher takedown accuracy, and she has an 11% higher takedown defense. Eileen Perez has also won 9 fights, and she's finished 56% of them. She's won 2 of her 3 UFC fights, and recently she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she's coming off of a 2-fight win streak. The last time she lost was in September of 2022. But let's go ahead and discuss some reasons aside from stats alone. Perez's diverse martial arts background, including Kung Fu, Sanda, and BJJ, allows her to adapt to different fight scenarios with ease. Her mental toughness and resilience, demonstrated in her career and her personal life, give her a crucial edge under pressure. Perez's aggressive and unorthodox striking, which was showcased in her victories over Romina and Stephanie, can catch opponents off guard. Additionally, Perez's current momentum, with 2 consecutive wins, boosts her confidence and her performance. And on the other hand, Edwards is known for her technical striking and volume, along with her strong grappling skills and her experience in the UFC. However, Perez can exploit Edwards' defensive vulnerabilities and utilize her versatility to control the fight, potentially securing a victory. I think it's going to go to the judges, but I do think that Eileen Perez will take the victory here. For the next fight, we have Gall versus Bassil Hafez. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Gall is 6 feet 2 inches tall with a reach of 74 inches and is 32 years old. And on the other hand, Bassil Hafez is 6 feet tall with a reach of 72 inches and is also 32 years old. Now, before we get into the fighting stats, I do want to let you guys know that Bassil Hafez's stats come from only 1 fight. So when it comes to striking, Gall lands 2.94 strikes per minute with a 46% accuracy. Bassil Hafez, on the other hand, lands 2.13 strikes per minute with a 25% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Gall lands 1.21 takedowns on average at a 30% accuracy, while Bassil Hafez, on the other hand, lands 3 takedowns on average with a 15% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Gall absorbs 4.25 strikes per minute with a 49% striking defense and a 36% takedown defense, whereas Bassil Hafez absorbs 5.53 strikes per minute with a 39% striking defense and a 50% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Gall's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Mike Malone via KO/TKO, which was back in April of 2022. Some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Jordan Williams, Salim Touari, George Sullivan, Sage Northcutt, which he was a hype train for a little bit, but that ended, and then CM Punk as well. CM Punk had a very short-lived MMA career. I mean, it's a meme at this point. And some of the notable opponents that Gall has lost to include Mike Malone, Alex Morono, Mike Perry, Diego Sanchez, and Randy Brown, some very well-known names in that division. His total record is 7 wins and 5 losses. He doesn't have the best record, but he does have some skills. Out of his 7 wins, 6 of them were submissions and 1 of them were decision victories, which does give him an 86% finishing rate thanks to those submissions. Now, out of his 5 losses, 2 of them were via KO/TKO and 3 were decision losses. He also has 5 first-round finishes, and recently he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a 2-fight losing streak into this fight. His most recent win was all the way back in July of 2021, and his most recent loss was in April of 2022. Now let's take a look at Bassil Hafez's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Jack Della Maddalena via split decision back in July 15, 2023. His total record is 8 wins and 4 losses, which isn't very impressive either. Out of his 8 wins, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 4 of them were submissions, and 3 were decision victories, which gives him a 63% finishing rate. And out of his 4 losses, all 4 were decision losses. Bassil Hafez also has 4 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in February of 2023, and his most recent loss was in July of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. 6 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Mickey Gall, and only 1 is leaning towards Bassil Hafez. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 75% probability for Mickey Gall. Now for my final prediction, I am going for Mickey Gall here. I know it's kind of a shocker, but I'm going to give him a way less confident 51% narrow probability of victory, as due to the fact that Bassil Hafez is probably the better fighter coming into this fight. He lands 1.79 more takedowns on average, and he has a 14% higher takedown defense. But the reason that I'm picking Mickey Gall is due to the fact that Gall has a height advantage of 3 inches. He has a decent reach advantage as well. He lands about 1 more strike per minute. He has a 21% higher striking accuracy. He absorbs less strikes per minute at about 1.28. He has a 10% higher striking defense, and he has a 15% higher takedown accuracy. He's also won 7 fights, and he's, again, finished 86% of them thanks to his submissions, and he's won 6 of 11 of his UFC fights, so he has a bit of experience under his belt, especially within the UFC. Now, I know recently he's only won 2 of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of back-to-back losses into this fight, but there are some reasons why I think he's going to win this one. For starters, Gall has superior submission skills. He has a black belt in BJJ, and he has won 6 fights through submissions, so that gives him a significant edge on the ground. His experience in high-profile UFC fights, including bouts against well-known opponents, has likely boosted his mental toughness and his ability to handle some pressure, providing a psychological advantage over Hafez, at least in my opinion. Gall's versatile training background has molded him into a generally well-rounded fighter with a balanced skill set, combining grappling and some improved striking, which could outmaneuver Hafez in this fight. However, Gall has shown vulnerabilities clearly in his striking defense, and he has had an inconsistent UFC career, alternating between wins and losses, which will pose challenges against a determined upcoming fighter like Hafez. I know it may sound like a bit of a stretch, but I'm expecting Gall to exploit Hafez's inexperience in the UFC and capitalize on his superior grappling to control the fight and look for submission opportunities. Yet, he has to be very careful of Hafez's aggressive grappling and cardio, which might wear him down and turn the fight into Hafez's favor. I'm going to do a bit of a shakeup. I'm going Mickey Gall here, and I'm going to take him by submission. Now for the next fight, we have Niko Price versus Alex Morono. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Niko Price is 6 feet tall with a reach of 76 inches and is 34 years old. And on the other hand, Alex Morono is also 6 feet tall with a reach of 72 inches and is 33 years old. So there's a 4-inch reach advantage that Niko Price has. Now when it comes to striking, Niko Price lands 5.46 strikes per minute at a 42% accuracy. And Alex Morono, on the other hand, lands 4.87 strikes per minute at a 40% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Niko Price lands 0.7 takedowns on average with a low 20% accuracy, while Alex Morono lands 0.32 takedowns on average with also a low 22% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Niko Price absorbs 5.6 strikes per minute with a 48% striking defense and a 64% takedown defense, whereas Alex Morono absorbs 4.16 strikes per minute with a 58% striking defense and a 55% takedown defense. Now let's check out Niko Price's recent fight history. Recently, Niko Price is coming off of a loss against Robbie Lawler via KO/TKO, which was back in July of 2023. Some of the notable opponents that Niko Price has defeated include Alex Oliveira, James Vick, Tim Means, Randy Brown, and George Sullivan. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include, of course, Robbie Lawler, Phil Rowe, Michael Pereira, Vicente Luque, and Geoff Neal. Niko Price's total record is 15 wins and 7 losses, and out of his 15 wins, 10 of them were via KO/TKO, 3 of them were via submission, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him a high 87% finishing rate. Now, out of his 7 losses, 5 of them were via KO/TKO, 1 was a submission loss, and the other was a decision loss. Niko Price also has 10 first-round finishes. Now, recently, he's only won 1 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a 2-fight losing streak. His most recent win was back in October of 2021, and his most recent loss was back in July of 2023. Now let's take a look at Alex Morono's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Court McGee via unanimous decision back in April of 2024. Some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Tim Means, Matthew Semmelsberger, Mickey Gall, and David Sawada. Some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Joaquin Buckley and Santiago Ponzinibbio, also Anthony Pettis, Chaos Williams, and Jordan Main. His total record is 23 wins and 9 losses, and out of his 23 wins, 6 of them were via KO/TKO, 7 of them were via submission, and 10 were decision victories, which gives him a 54.2% finish rate. Now, out of his 9 losses, 3 of them were via KO/TKO, and 6 of them were decision losses. He also has 11 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was back in April of 2024, and his most recent loss was back in October of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observations as well. Only 1 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Niko Price, and 6 of them are leaning towards Alex Morono. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 58% probability of Alex Morono. Now for my final prediction, I give Alex Morono a more confident 62% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Alex Morono is 1 year younger, he absorbs 1.44 less strikes per minute, he has a 10% higher striking defense, and a 2% higher takedown accuracy. Alex Morono has won 24 fights, and he's finished 54% of them. He's won 13 of his 20 UFC fights, so he has good UFC experience, and he's recently won 3 of his last 5 fights, plus he's coming off of a win. But let's go ahead and discuss some reasons aside from stats alone as to why he's going to win. Morono's strengths lie in his versatile striking and his aggressive style, which can overwhelm Price and disrupt his game plan. Additionally, Morono's experience and his mental toughness do give him an edge, allowing him to bounce back from his setbacks and perform at a pretty high level. His superior grappling and his submission skills can neutralize Price's strengths and create opportunities for a finish. Morono's strategic fight IQ is another advantage that he has, as he's able to prepare meticulously for each opponent and adapt his game plan as he needs. However, Morono has defensive lapses and he has inconsistent performances which can be exploited by Price. Morono can capitalize on Price's defensive flaws and recent decline by maintaining constant pressure and imposing his will early on in the fight. His grappling skills can also be a decisive factor here, as he can control Price on the ground and work towards a submission. However, Morono needs to be cautious of Price's knockout power and his overall unpredictability as a fighter, as those may pose significant threats to him. Overall, Morono has a pretty good case of victory, and I think if he effectively capitalizes on his strengths and remains focused throughout the fight, he will be able to pull off a victory here. I don't think that he's going to be able to finish him, but I do think he'll take it to the judges and he will get the unanimous decision victory. For the next fight, we have Phil Rowe versus Jake Matthews. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Phil Rowe is 6 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 80 inches and he's 33 years old. And on the other hand, Jake Matthews is 6 feet tall with a reach of 73 inches and is 29 years old. That's an insane reach advantage of 7 inches and a height advantage of 3 inches for Phil Rowe. Now, when it comes to striking, Phil Rowe lands 3.94 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy, and Jake Matthews, on the other hand, lands 3.3 strikes per minute at a 45% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Phil Rowe lands 0.85 takedowns on average at a 40% accuracy, while Jake Matthews, on the other hand, lands 1.59 takedowns on average at a 40% accuracy as well. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Phil Rowe absorbs 4.32 strikes per minute with a 54% striking defense and a 59% takedown defense, whereas Jake Matthews absorbs 2.56 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and a 62% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Phil Rowe's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Neil Magny via split decision back in June of 2023. Phil Rowe's total record is 10 wins and 4 losses, and out of his 10 wins, 6 of them were via KO/TKO and 4 were submissions, which gives him a 100% finish rate. Out of his 4 losses, 1 of them was via KO/TKO and the other 3 were decision losses. He also has 3 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in December of 2022, and his most recent loss was in June of 2023. Now let's take a look at Jake Matthews' recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Michael Morales via unanimous decision back in November of 2023. Jake Matthews' total record is 19 wins and 7 losses, and out of his 19 wins, 5 of them were via KO/TKO, 8 were submissions, and 6 were decision victories, which gives him a 69% finish rate. Out of his 7 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 3 were submissions, and 3 were decision losses. He also has 4 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in July of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in November of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observation as well. 2 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Phil Rowe, and the other 5 are leaning towards Jake Matthews. Now when we weigh those prediction models together, we get a 57% probability of victory for Jake Matthews. And after doing research outside of statistics as well as watching previous fights, I do think that that weighted prediction is a fair one, and that's due to the fact that Jake Matthews is 4 years younger. He absorbs 1.76 less strikes per minute. He has a 6% higher striking defense. He lands 0.7 more takedowns on average. He has a 3% higher takedown defense, and he lands 0.2 more submissions on average. He's won 19 fights and he's finished 69% of them, and he's won 12 of his 19 UFC fights, so he has good UFC experience here as well. He's recently only won 2 of his last 5 fights and he is coming off of a loss, but I think there are some reasons as to why he'll win. So let's talk about those reasons that are aside from stats alone. Matthews is a well-rounded fighter with a versatile skill set, and he holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's improved his striking abilities over his career as well. His experience in the UFC since 2014 and his resilience in bouncing back from his losses and showcasing his mental toughness and adaptability are key. Matthews' solid defensive skills will help him withstand Rowe's aggressive striking. Additionally, Matthews' cardio and endurance allows him to maintain a high pace throughout each of his fights, which could be advantageous if this fight goes to the distance. However, Matthews has struggled with some inconsistencies in the UFC, which might be a weakness if he fails to maintain his form against Rowe. Furthermore, Matthews has shown susceptibility to submissions, having been submitted in 3 of his losses, which Rowe might exploit if the fight goes to the ground. Nonetheless, Matthews has opportunities to exploit Rowe's defensive flaws, utilize his superior grappling skills, and maintain pressure to control his fight. He has to be careful of Rowe's striking power though, and that reach advantage in his aggressive style in order to secure this victory. Bottom line, I think he gets the victory here via unanimous decision. For the next fight, we have Grant Dawson versus Joe Solecki. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Grant Dawson's 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 72 inches and is 30 years old. And on the other hand, Joe Solecki is 5 feet 8 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 30 years old as well. When it comes to striking, Grant Dawson lands 2.97 strikes per minute with a 51% accuracy. Joe Solecki, on the other hand, lands 2.21 strikes per minute with a 56% accuracy. Now, as far as grappling goes, Grant Dawson lands 3.68 takedowns on average with a 36% accuracy, while Joe Solecki, on the other hand, lands 2.65 takedowns on average with a 50% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Grant Dawson absorbs 2.27 strikes per minute with a 45% striking defense and a 40% takedown defense, whereas Joe Solecki absorbs 1.53 strikes per minute with a 52% striking defense and a 50% takedown defense. Now let's check out Grant Dawson's recent fight history. Recently, Grant Dawson's coming off of a loss against Bobby Green via KO/TKO back in October of 2023. Grant Dawson's total record is 20 wins and only 2 losses, and out of his 20 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 13 were via submissions, and 3 were via decisions, which gives him an 85% finishing rate. Now, out of his 2 losses, both of them were KO/TKO losses. He also has 7 first-round finishes, Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in July of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in October of 2023. Now let's take a look at Joe Solecki's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Ricard Close via KO/TKO back in December of 2023. His total record is 13 wins and 4 losses, and out of his 13 wins, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 8 of them were submissions, and 4 were decision victories, which gives him a 69% finishing rate. Out of his 4 losses, 2 of them were KO/TKOs, and the other 2 were decision losses. He also has 8 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight as well. His most recent win was back in February of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in December of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study as well. 5 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Grant Dawson, and only 2 are leaning towards Joe Solecki. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 54.5% probability for Grant Dawson. Now for my final prediction, I'm giving Grant Dawson a more confident 67% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Grant Dawson has a height advantage of 1 inch, he has a reach advantage of 2 inches, he lands 0.76 more strikes per minute, and he lands 1.03 more takedowns on average. Grant Dawson has won 20 fights, and he's finished 85% of them. He's won 8 of his 10 UFC fights, so not only does he have good UFC experience, but he's also passed his challenges. He's also won 3 of his last 5 fights. But speaking aside from stats alone, Dawson has superior wrestling and grappling skills, which he's really worked on at American Top Team, and he gives him a significant edge in this fight. It's going to allow him to control his opponent on the ground and secure submissions as he previously has done. His experience against high-level competition and mental toughness further bolster his position in this fight. Dawson's ability to exploit Solecki's weaker takedown defense by implementing a wrestling-heavy game plan might neutralize Solecki's striking and submission threats. However, Dawson must be cautious of Solecki's strong Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background and his potential to capitalize on striking vulnerabilities. Ultimately, Dawson's well-rounded skill set and his strategic grappling dominance provide a pretty clear path to victory for him. Now, I don't think he's going to be able to finish Solecki, but I do see him controlling most of this fight, and this fight will go to the judges, and I could see him getting the unanimous decision victory. For the next fight, we have Cesar Almeida versus Roman Kopylov. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Cesar Almeida is 6 feet 1 inch tall with a reach of 74 inches and is 36 years old. And on the other hand, Roman Kopylov is 6 feet tall with a reach of 75 inches and is 33 years old. Now when it comes to striking, Cesar Almeida lands 4.5 strikes per minute at a 64% accuracy, and Roman Kopylov on the other hand lands 4.66 strikes per minute with a 54% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Roman Kopylov lands 0.42 takedowns on average with a 50% accuracy. And when it comes to defense, Cesar Almeida absorbs 1.31 strikes per minute with a 50% striking defense and a 62% takedown defense, whereas Roman Kopylov absorbs 4.1 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and an 87% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Cesar Almeida's recent fight history. Recently, Cesar Almeida is coming off of a win against Dylan Butka via KO/TKO back in April of 2024. Cesar Almeida's total record is 5 wins and no losses, and out of his 5 wins, 4 of them have been KO/TKOs and 1 was a decision victory, which gives him an 80% finish rate. He also has 3 first-round finishes, and his most recent win was back in April of 2024. Now let's check out Roman Kopylov's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Anthony Hernandez via submission back in February of 2024. His total record is 12 wins and 3 losses, and out of his 12 wins, 11 of them were KO/TKOs and only 1 was a decision victory, which gives him a 92% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, 2 of them were via submission and 1 was a decision loss. He also has 1 first-round finish, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in September of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in February of 2024. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observation as well. 5 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Cesar Almeida, and only 2 are leaning towards Roman Kopylov. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 57.2% probability of victory for Cesar Almeida. Now for my final prediction, I am going for the underdog here. I'm giving Cesar Almeida a slightly less confident 55% probability of victory, and there's a few reasons for that. Roman Kopylov is 3 years younger, he has a reach advantage of an inch, he lands 0.16 more strikes per minute, he has a 10% higher striking defense, and he has a 25% higher takedown defense, so I have to give him some respect. But the reason that I am picking Cesar Almeida is due to the fact that he has a height advantage of an inch. He has a 10% higher striking accuracy, and he absorbs 2.8 less strikes per minute. Not only is he undefeated in the fact that he's finished 80% of his fights, but he has an elite kickboxing background. He has a record of 47 wins, 8 losses, and 1 draw, and victories over notable fighters like Alex Pereira, which makes him a challenging striker. With 4 of his 5 MMA wins coming by knockout, his powerful striking is a critical asset, especially against Kopylov's vulnerabilities to strong strikers. Almeida has also shown improvements in his grappling skills, evident from his training in BJJ and successful UFC debut. He's riding a 5-fight win streak, and his momentum and confidence provide a psychological edge. However, his limited MMA experience and potential vulnerability to submissions are areas of concern. Almeida can exploit Kopylov's defensive gaps and maintain the fight on the feet to utilize his striking skills. Despite Kopylov's wrestling and knockout power threats, Almeida's ability to control the fight with his striking and maintain his momentum could be the deciding factors in this matchup. I'm going to have full transparency with you guys. Almeida's win here really depends on his ability to keep the fight standing and utilize his striking. If he does not do that, then this is Kopylov's fight to win. I think that he will be able to do that, and I think he's going to finish it early. I'm going to go for Almeida via KO/TKO. For the next fight, we have Randy Brown versus Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Randy Brown is 6 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 78 inches and is 33 years old. And on the other hand, Zaleski dos Santos is 6 feet tall with a reach of 73 inches and is 37 years old. When it comes to striking, Randy Brown lands 4.37 strikes per minute with a 46% accuracy. Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, on the other hand, lands 4.52 strikes per minute with a 42% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Randy Brown lands 0.78 takedowns on average at a 39% accuracy, while Zaleski dos Santos, on the other hand, lands 0.43 takedowns on average at a 13% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Randy Brown absorbs 3.33 strikes per minute with a 54% striking defense and a 74% takedown defense, whereas Zaleski dos Santos absorbs 3.33 strikes per minute with a 57% striking defense and a 68% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Randy Brown's recent fight history. Recently, Randy Brown's coming off of a win against Muslim Salikov via KO/TKO back in February of 2024. Some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Wellington Turman, Francisco Trinaldo, Chaos Williams, and Jared Gooden. Some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Jack Della Maddalena, Vicente Luque, Niko Price, and Bilal Muhammad. Randy Brown's total record is 18 wins and 5 losses, and out of his 18 wins, 7 of them were via KO/TKO, 5 of them were via submissions, and 6 were decision victories, which gives him a 67% finish rate. Now, out of his 5 losses, 2 of them were via KO/TKO, 2 of them were submissions, and 1 was a decision loss. He also has 4 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of 2 wins into this fight. His most recent win was in February of 2024, and his most recent loss was back in February of 2023. Now let's take a look at Zaleski dos Santos' recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a draw against Renat, which was back in November of 2023. His total record is 24 wins and 7 losses. Out of his 24 wins, 14 were via KO/TKO, 3 were via submissions, and 7 were decision victories, which gives him a 71% finishing rate. Out of his 7 losses, 1 was via KO/TKO, 2 were via submissions, and 4 were decision losses. He has 10 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 of his last 5 fights, and he is currently coming off of that draw. His most recent win was back in June of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in July of 2020. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. 4 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Randy Brown, and 3 are leaning towards Zaleski dos Santos. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 53.4% probability of victory for Zaleski dos Santos. However, I'm going to go opposite of the prediction models here and give Randy Brown a 55% probability of victory. That's due to the fact that Randy Brown has a height advantage of 4 inches, he's 4 years younger, he has a reach advantage of 5 inches, he has a 4% higher striking accuracy, he lands 0.35 more takedowns on average, he has a 26% higher takedown accuracy, he has a 6% higher takedown defense, and he lands 0.1 more submissions on average. He's also won 18 fights and he's finished 67% of them. He's won 12 of his 17 UFC fights, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of 2 wins into this fight. But let's go ahead and discuss some reasons aside from stats alone. Brown's versatile fighting style, combining effective striking and grappling, along with his significant reach advantage of 78 inches, allows him to control the pace and distance of the fight. Training rigorously at Budokan Martial Arts Academy, Brown's dedication to continuous improvement and mental toughness further strengthened his position in this fight. On the other hand, Zaleski dos Santos is well known for his aggressive and flashy striking, incorporating elements of Muay Thai and Capoeira, and has shown remarkable durability and experience. However, his weakness in submission defense and reach disadvantage could be exploited by Brown. Brown can leverage his BJJ black belt to capitalize on Zaleski dos Santos' submission vulnerabilities and use his reach to keep the fight at a distance. Despite the threat posed by Zaleski dos Santos' knockout power and his aggressive fighting style, Brown's well-rounded skills and strategic advantages position him favorably to secure a victory in this fight. I don't see him getting the finish though. I think this one will go to the judges as well, and I think he's going to get the unanimous decision victory. For the next fight, we have Jailton Almeida versus Alexander Romanov. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Jailton Almeida is 6 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 79 inches and is 32 years old. On the other hand, Alexander Romanov is 6 feet 2 inches tall with a reach of 75 inches and is 33 years old. When it comes to striking, Jailton Almeida lands 2.54 strikes per minute at a 64% accuracy. Alexander Romanov, on the other hand, lands 4.06 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Jailton Almeida lands 6.88 takedowns on average at a 59% accuracy, while Alexander Romanov, on the other hand, lands 4.32 takedowns on average with a 54% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Jailton Almeida absorbs 0.74 strikes per minute with a 40% striking defense and a 75% takedown defense, whereas Alexander Romanov absorbs 2.2 strikes per minute with a 50% striking defense and a 20% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Jailton Almeida's recent fight history. Recently, Jailton Almeida is coming off of a loss against Curtis Blaydes via KO/TKO back in March of 2024. His total record is 19 wins and 3 losses, and out of his 19 wins, 7 of them were via KO/TKO, 11 were via submissions, and 1 was a decision victory, which gives him a 90% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, 2 were via KO/TKOs and 1 was a decision loss. He also has 14 first-round finishes and recently has won 4 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in November of 2023, and his most recent loss was pretty recent back in March of 2024. Now let's take a look at Alexander Romanov's recent fight history. Recently, Alexander Romanov's coming off of a win against Blagoy Ivanov via unanimous decision back in July of 2023. Alexander Romanov's total record is 17 wins and only 2 losses, and out of his 17 wins, 6 of them were via KO/TKOs, 9 of them were via submissions, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him an 88% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, 1 was of KO/TKO and the other was a decision loss. He also has 10 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was back in July of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in March of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. 6 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Jailton Almeida, and only 1 is leaning towards Alexander Romanov. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 52.8% probability of victory for Jailton Almeida. Now for my final prediction, I give Jailton Almeida a way more confident 64% probability of victory, and it's due to the fact that Jailton Almeida has a height advantage of 1 inch, he's a year younger, he has a reach advantage of 4 inches, he has a 12% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 1.46 less strikes per minute, he lands 2.56 more takedowns on average, he has a 5% higher takedown accuracy, he has a 55% higher takedown defense, and he lands 1.3 more submissions on average. He's also won 20 fights and he's finished 90% of them. He's won 6 of his 7 UFC fights and recently he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a loss here, but he has a lot going for him in this fight. He has elite grappling skills and he has an aggressive wrestling style which allows him to control his opponents on the ground. He secures quick takedowns and maintains a dominant position throughout the fight. His superior cardio enables him to keep a high pace throughout the fight, and that can exploit Romanov's known cardio issues. Additionally, Almeida's mental toughness and his momentum from recent performances, including a dominant win over Derek Lewis, add to his confidence and his drive. However, Almeida's striking skills remain relatively untested, and his heavy reliance on grappling could become predictable if Romanov manages to defend those takedowns. Romanov's power and wrestling background pose significant threats, and Almeida must avoid being overconfident to prevent critical mistakes. Overall, Almeida's ability to impose his grappling game and maintain pressure could be the deciding factors in this matchup. I could see him taking control of this fight, taking it to the ground, using his grappling, ultimately getting an opening and getting that submission victory. I'm going to take Almeida via submission. For the next fight, we have Kevin Holland versus Michael Oleksiejczuk. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Kevin Holland is 6 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 81 inches, and he is 31 years old. And on the other end, Michael Oleksiejczuk is 6 feet tall with a reach of 74 inches and is 29 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Kevin Holland lands 4.24 strikes per minute at a 49% accuracy. Michael Oleksiejczuk, on the other hand, lands 5.06 strikes per minute with a 50% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Kevin Holland lands 0.85 takedowns on average with a 38% accuracy, while Michael Oleksiejczuk, on the other hand, lands 0.75 takedowns on average at a 44% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Kevin Holland absorbs 3.19 strikes per minute with a 50% striking defense and a 54% takedown defense, whereas Michael Oleksiejczuk absorbs 4.26 strikes per minute with a 61% striking defense and a 48% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Kevin Holland's recent fight history. Recently, Kevin Holland is coming off of a loss against Michael Page via unanimous decision back in March of 2024. His total record is 25 wins and 11 losses, and out of his 25 wins, 13 were via KO/TKO, 8 were via submissions, and 4 were decision victories, which gives him an 84% finishing rate. Out of his 11 losses, 1 was via KO/TKO, 3 were via submissions, and 7 were decision losses. He also has 12 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he is on a 2-fight losing streak coming into this fight. His most recent win was back in July of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in March of 2024. Now let's take a look at Michael Oleksiejczuk's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Michael Pereira via submission back in March of 2024 as well. Michael Oleksiejczuk's total record is 19 wins and 7 losses, and out of his 19 wins, 14 were via KO/TKO, 1 was a submission, and 4 were decision victories, which gives him a 79% finishing rate. Out of his 7 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 5 of them were submissions, and 1 was a decision loss. He also has 11 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in August of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in March of 2024. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observations as well. 4 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Kevin Holland, and 3 are leaning towards Michael Oleksiejczuk. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 60.4% probability of victory for Kevin Holland. And I know that his previous performance wasn't very convincing, especially against someone who was debuting. But for my final prediction, I am going with Kevin Holland, and I am giving him a bit more confident 65% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that he has a height advantage of 3 inches in this matchup. He has a reach advantage of 7 inches. He absorbs 1.07 less strikes per minute. He lands just a little bit more takedowns on average, and he has a 7% higher takedown defense as well. So I think we're going to see a much different matchup than we did back in March. Kevin Holland has won 25 fights, and he's finished 84% of them. He's won 12 of his 21 UFC fights, which is pretty good experience regardless of win or lose. And recently, I know he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a 2-fight losing streak. But here's the thing. Holland has a versatile fighting style. He combines Kung Fu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which allows him to adapt to various scenarios while using his striking ability and his knockout power. All of that makes him a very challenging fighter when it comes to stand-up exchanges, especially historically when he has the size advantage. His experience and high activity level in the UFC keep him sharp, and his mental toughness and showmanship can unnerve less experienced fighters. Despite his ground game vulnerabilities and occasional inconsistency, Holland's reach advantage and his submission skills provide clear opportunities to exploit Oleksiejczuk's weaknesses, particularly his submission defense and shorter reach. Oleksiejczuk's aggressive striking and ground and pound are significant threats, but Holland's well-rounded skill set and his ability to maintain his distance position him favorably in this fight. I think we're going to see a classic Kevin Holland KO/TKO, and that is my final prediction. For the next fight, we have Sean Strickland versus Paulo Costa. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Sean Strickland is 6 feet 1 inch tall with a reach of 76 inches and is 33 years old. And on the other hand, Paulo Costa is 6 feet 1 inch tall with a reach of 72 inches and is 33 years old as well. Now when it comes to striking, Sean Strickland lands 5.91 strikes per minute at a 41% accuracy. Paulo Costa, on the other hand, lands 6.2 strikes per minute at a 58% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Sean Strickland lands 0.85 takedowns on average with a 64% accuracy, while Paulo Costa, on the other hand, lands 0.45 takedowns on average with a 75% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Sean Strickland absorbs 4.33 strikes per minute with a 62% striking defense and a 77% takedown defense, whereas Paulo Costa absorbs 6.38 strikes per minute with a 47% striking defense and an 80% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Sean Strickland's recent fight history. Recently, Sean Strickland's coming off of a loss against Dricus du Plessis via split decision back in January of 2024. Some notable opponents that Sean Strickland has defeated include Israel Adesanya, Abus Magomedov, Nasiruddin Imavov, Jack Hermanson, and Uriah Hall. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Jared Cannonier, Alex Pereira, Zaleski dos Santos, and Kamaru Usman. Sean Strickland's total record is 28 wins and 6 losses, and out of his 28 wins, 11 were via KO/TKO, 4 of them were via submissions, and 13 were via decision victories, which gives him a 54% finishing rate. Out of the 6 losses that he has, 2 of them were via KO/TKO, and 4 of them were decision losses. He has 9 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, including a championship fight, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in September of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in January of 2024. Now let's take a look at Paulo Costa's recent fight history. Recently, Paulo Costa is coming off of a loss against Robert Whittaker via unanimous decision back in February of 2024. Some of the notable opponents that Paulo Costa has defeated include Luke Rockhold, Yoel Romero, Uriah Hall, and Johnny Hendricks. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Robert Whittaker, Marvin Vettori, and Israel Adesanya, which was a championship fight. His total record is 14 wins and 3 losses, and out of his 14 wins, 11 were via KO/TKO, 1 was a submission victory, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him a pretty high 86% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, 1 was via KO/TKO, and 2 were decision losses. He also has 9 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in August of 2022, and his most recent loss was back in February of 2024. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. All 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Sean Strickland, and 0 are leaning towards Paulo Costa. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 66% probability of victory for Sean Strickland. Now for my final prediction, I'm actually going to give Sean Strickland a slightly more confident 68% probability of victory. That's due to the fact that Sean Strickland has a reach advantage here of 4 inches. He also absorbs 2.05 less strikes per minute. He has a 15% higher striking defense. He lands 0.4 more takedowns on average as well. He's also won 28 fights, and he's finished 54% of them. He's won 15 of his 21 UFC fights, and he's recently won 3 out of his last 5 fights. But let's discuss reasons aside from stats alone as to why Sean Strickland will likely win this fight. A lot of it has to do with the way that he fights, his style itself. His unorthodox fighting style, which is based on that Philly shell defense, is known to disrupt his opponent's rhythms and nullifies their strengths, which gives him a significant edge in his fights, especially recently. His relentless pressure and high output striking can overwhelm Costa and dictate the fight's pace. He's also crazy and spontaneous, and his mental fortitude, which was forged by personal struggles, makes him a resilient fighter in the face of adversity. His recent experiences in high-stakes championship fights have prepared him for the pressure of this fight. He has the ability to apply insane pressure to his opponents, and sometimes it looks or feels like nothing you throw at him will stop him. If you rewatch that Adesanya fight, you'll see Strickland pushing his team away and standing in between rounds, ready to charge towards Adesanya. This is going to be a very fun fight between 2 very tough fighters that have a lot to prove, and they have very large personalities in the UFC. However, It's important to note that Strickland's defensive vulnerabilities and his potential overconfidence are notable weaknesses in this fight against Costa. In order for him to beat Costa, he has to take advantage of Costa's aggressive style and neutralize his power through constant movement and high-volume striking. Yet Strickland must remain cautious of Costa's one-punch knockout power as well and manage his cardio to maintain his approach over 5 rounds. Ultimately, Strickland's ability to disrupt Costa's rhythm and impose his unique style could be the deciding factor in this matchup. I think that this fight is going to go the distance and Strickland's going to end up winning via unanimous decision if he can neutralize Costa's power. I think it's going to be a fun 5-round fight full of powerful shots, taunting, and a whole lot of violence. For the next fight, we have Islam Makhachev versus Dustin the Diamond Poirier, our main event for UFC 302. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Islam Makhachev is 5 feet 10 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 32 years old. On the other hand, Dustin Poirier is 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 72 inches and is 35 years old. When it comes to striking, Islam Makhachev lands 2.46 strikes per minute at a 60% accuracy. Dustin Poirier, on the other hand, lands 5.45 strikes per minute at a 51% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Islam Makhachev lands 3.17 takedowns on average at a 60% accuracy, while Dustin Poirier, on the other hand, lands 1.33 takedowns on average at a 36% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Islam Makhachev absorbs 1.27 strikes per minute with a 61% striking defense and a 90% takedown defense, whereas Dustin Poirier absorbs 4.36 strikes per minute with a 53% striking defense and a 63% takedown defense. Now let's check out Islam Makhachev's recent fight history. Recently, Islam Makhachev's coming off of a win against Alexander Volkanovski via KO/TKO back in October of 2023. Some of the notable opponents that Islam Makhachev has defeated include Alexander Volkanovski twice, Charles Oliveira, Bobby Green, and Dan Hooker. His total record is 25 wins and only 1 loss, and out of his 25 wins, 5 were via KO/TKO, 11 were via submissions, and 9 were decision victories, which gives him a 64% finishing rate. His 1 loss was a KO/TKO, and that was to Adriano Martins. He also has 10 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 5 out of his last 5 fights, and he's on a 13-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in October of 2023, and his most recent loss was in October of 2015. Now let's check out Dustin Poirier's recent fight history. Recently, Dustin Poirier is coming off of a win against Benoit Saint-Denis via KO/TKO back in March of 2024. Some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Michael Chandler, Conor McGregor twice, and Dan Hooker. And some of the notable opponents he's lost to include Justin Gaethje, Charles Oliveira, which was a championship fight, and Khabib Nurmagomedov, which was also a championship fight. He's also lost to Michael Johnson and Conor McGregor as well. His total record is 30 wins and 8 losses, and out of his 30 wins, 16 were via KO/TKO, 7 were submissions, and 7 were decision victories, which gives him a 77% finishing rate. And out of his 8 losses, 3 of them were KO/TKO losses, 3 of them were submissions, and 2 were decision losses. He also has 13 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights against very difficult opponents, and he is coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was in March of 2024, and his most recent loss was back in July of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. All 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Islam Makhachev, and 0 are leaning towards Dustin the Diamond Poirier. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 65.2% probability for Islam Makhachev to win. This fight is a rough one to predict. Logically, Islam will likely win, but Dustin cannot be underestimated. He's been underestimated several times, and he proved the world wrong time and time again. He's known for that. I picked him as the underdog for the fight against Benoit Saint-Denis, and even though many people were saying that he wouldn't win, he managed to pull that victory off after having kind of a rough first round. Also, it feels perfect for Poirier to win this fight, especially when you consider his story. But if you've been watching MMA for a while, you know that this sport is dark and disappointing at times, especially when it comes to stories. And unfortunately, although I hope I'm proven wrong for Dustin's sake, I believe that this will be another one of those moments. So, for my final prediction, not to beat around the bush, I give Islam Makhachev a more confident 73% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Islam Makhachev has a height advantage of an inch, he's 3 years younger, he has a 9% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 3.09 less strikes per minute, he has an 8% higher striking defense, he He lands 1.84 more takedowns on average. He has a 24% higher takedown accuracy, and he has a 27% higher takedown defense. It's no surprise that Dustin Poirier has a weakness to wrestling. We've seen what happened in the Khabib fight. But the thing is, Islam Makhachev also is pretty dominant. He's won 25 fights and he's finished 64% of them. He's won 14 of his 15 UFC fights, and his last loss was all the way back in 2015. He's recently won all of his fights and he's on a 13-fight win streak. Now, aside from stats alone, Makhachev's exceptional grappling and wrestling, which is rooted in his combat sambo background, give him a significant edge on the ground. He also has improved his striking, making him a very versatile and dangerous fighter, both on the ground and on his feet. His strategic approach and his high fight IQ allow him to adapt and control fights effectively. Currently, he's on that crazy 13-fight win streak, and he's had 2 successful title defenses. He enters the fight with strong momentum and confidence. However, he does have a very low striking volume, and he has the pressure of being the reigning champion, and these could be potential weaknesses in this fight. Sometimes that pressure is just overwhelming. Opportunities for Makhachev include exploiting Poirier's ground game vulnerabilities, using striking to set up takedowns, and maintaining a high pace to wear Poirier down. But if Dustin Poirier is able to get to the pocket and start swinging towards Makhachev, it could be very dangerous for the current champion. So he's going to have to be extremely careful when dealing with someone like Dustin Poirier with that power. But at the end of the day, Makhachev's strengths position him really well for a victory in this fight. He has to stay cautious and avoid any surprises from Poirier, or being cornered or being stuck in the pocket, anything like that. He has to be very mindful of that. He has to strike, take the fight to the ground, and control as he always does. Look for that submission opportunity. If he tries to stand and bang with Poirier, he's going to regret it. Final prediction, Makhachev wears Poirier down. He takes the fight to the ground. He implements ground and pound. He finds the submission opportunity and gets the submission victory, perhaps via arm triangle or rear naked choke, and I'm thinking maybe the 3rd or 4th round. And with that being said, those are all of the fights for UFC 302, Makhachev versus Poirier. I hope you all enjoyed and that your bets hit this weekend. Thank you all so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos for you all. Running all of this data and analysis and the prediction models and the charts and graphs takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate your support. Please check out that Patreon if you'd like to support me through there as well. There's a $10 contribution/donation option and a premium $20 option, which comes with the extra data analysis and stats that I just started. So if you want to see a free preview of that, join with the free membership and you'll see that for UFC 302's main event, Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier, I've given you guys the free version of those stats. So check them out. Let me know what you think. Show some love. Throw a little help my way. Thank you all so much for watching again, and see you guys in the next one.